We're going to go ahead and get started with history. Before we begin our new lesson today, we're going to go over some things that we learned yesterday. After the War for Independence, they came up with their first plan of government. What was this called? Their first plan of government. It was the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation. And what power did the Articles of Confederation lack? They lacked the power to tax the people. They had no power to tax the people, so it wasn't very powerful. Now, they came up with the Constitutional Convention. Do you remember where they held that meeting? The meeting took place in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and they came up with a new form of government, which we still use today. What government did they come up with? It was the Constitution, all right? So, the Articles of Confederation, weak and bad. The Constitution, good. This is what we're using today. Now, today we're going to be talking about the three branches of government. I'm so excited for this. I'm going to be linking quite a few videos. I think, well, I'll do two and then one art project that you could do if you want. It's not required, but it's just cool. We usually do it in class for the three branches of government. Now, as they got together and they signed the Constitution, remember, they had just come from a government that was like taking advantage of them and not giving them certain rights. So they were very wary and scared about starting a new government, especially one that's very strong. So that's why they did come up with the Articles of Confederation. Well, they agreed to sign to the Constitution. As each state did this, they were no longer now, I'm from New York, or I'm from Vermont, or I'm from Connecticut. Now they were all referring to themselves as Americans. They're working more together as one country instead of individual units. So today we're going to be talking about the three branches of government. And if you have a piece of paper and you could write these down, you're not going to be responsible for knowing the big names for all three, but you will be responsible for knowing each one and which one does which thing. So I would learn these, and you'll need these next year and the years to follow. So this is just all important stuff. The first group, if you have your pen, there are three different groups. It's executive, legislative, and judicial. Executive, legislative, and judicial. I've written these down here: executive, legislative, and judicial. If you want to write them down, you can write those down. You don't have to, but underneath you will have to write. You should write this down, okay? The next, for the executive, first we've got to have a head of government, right? Now, the reason why they did these three branches of government was because they wanted to make sure that they wouldn't have a problem like they did with England, and that they tried to split the power. So not one, like you know how in England it was the king, right? King George III. Well, they thought, we don't want this again. We want to make sure that our power is split up into groups so that each thing can keep each other in check. If one gets too powerful, then the other one can check it and balance it. And the other branch of government has power and the other one can branch it. Well, we have a head, and the head is our president, okay? So under executive, or if you just want to write president, you're going to write the president, and his job is to see that the laws are obeyed. And so if you could write underneath, the president, sees that the laws are obeyed. He's the head of our government, and he's making sure that the laws are obeyed. Our next group is the legislative branch. The legislative branch makes the laws. For our First Amendment, when we memorized, or when we started to memorize before the Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. This is actually on page 252. They say Congress shall make no law. It's on the Bill of Rights. What they're saying is don't make a law, Congress, that does this. But Congress is the group that does make the laws. Now, Congress makes the laws. The president sees that the laws are obeyed. And the two underneath Congress, I made two houses. Underneath Congress, Congress is made up of two houses. You have the House of Representatives and you have the Senate. Now, the reason why they have two different houses is because they want to make it fair. Connecticut's kind of a small state, right? So Connecticut should probably not be getting the same amount of votes that a big state like California would get. California is huge and has tons of people. Now, Alaska is the biggest state, but Alaska has not nearly as many people as California. So that's why they came up with this House of Representatives, okay? House of Representatives is a group of people that make decisions and speak for us, and the House of Representatives would speak for each state. Now, the number of representatives is conditional, which means it's changing and it's dependent on how big the state is. So, how big the population is. So, for example, a state like New York obviously has a lot more people than Connecticut. So New York would get more representatives than Connecticut. Now, Connecticut, I think we're a little bit larger than Rhode Island, so Connecticut would get more votes than Rhode Island. New Hampshire has more people in it than Alaska, so that's how it works. Depending on how many people, not the size of the actual state, but the size of the amount of people that are in there. Now, that wouldn't necessarily be fair if we just did it by a House of Representatives to make the laws, because then a little state like Connecticut would have no say, right? So they decided to also have something called the Senate. The Senate. So the two groups that they're divided into are the House of Representatives and the Senate. House of Representatives just depends on how many people are in the House, how big's the House, and Senate is they only have 2 representatives per state. So if we have 50 states, how many representatives or how many people in the Senate do we have? How many senators? Yeah, if you said 100, you're correct. We have 100 senators, and that number never changes because there's 50 states. So we have 100 in the Senate, and we have 2 per state. And the House of Representatives is determined by the population, okay? So you can think the House number is always changing depending on the amount of people in the House. And then the Senate only has 2. So this way it makes it fair. So now a big state like California has 2 and Connecticut has 2. So we get equal representation, but then over here they'll get more than us, but that's because they have more people. So it all kind of levels out to be an equal amount. So this legislative House of Representatives and the Senate, they make the laws. Now the judicial, this is our third one. This is to see that the laws are obeyed. They judge, judicial judges, whether the laws have been obeyed, okay? So another word for that is they interpret the laws. They look at the laws and they say, you did not obey the law, or you did obey the law. And we know this because when you think of a judge, what do the judges do? You know, you go to court and you say, no, I didn't break the law, or yes, I did break the law. And the judge has to determine whether you obeyed the law or not. So the judicial branch sees whether the laws are obeyed. And the highest court in our land is called the Supreme Court. So you put the Supreme Court underneath, and this is the judicial branch. They see if the laws are obeyed, and we have the Supreme Court. So let's just recap. We have the executive branch, the legislative, and the judicial. Executive is the president, and he sees that the laws are obeyed. I know this is tricky because this one is executive sees that the laws are obeyed, and then the judicial judges whether the laws are obeyed. So you're going to have to remember the difference between those two. And so the legislative, that's the one that makes the laws, okay? And so underneath each one is the different jobs that each one of those has. Now I'm going to be playing or adding videos underneath this video to watch, and I want you to make sure that you read page 124 and 125. Okay, you're going to be reading page 124 and 125. You're going to be reading about the president, the Congress, and the Supreme Court, the three branches of government. All right, I'll see you next time.